The man who shouldn't exist. I met Daniel on a stormy night in a bookstore that smelled of damp paper and forgotten things. He was standing in the dim light, flipping through an old, decayed copy of Wuthering Heights, his fingers trailing over the fragile pages as if they were something sacred. His eyes, deep, dark, hollow, locked onto mine, and my breath hitched. He didn't blink. His smile was small, almost knowing, as if he had been waiting for me. We spoke, and time folded in on itself. His voice was rich, hypnotic, like a lullaby made of whispers and shadows. He never mentioned his past, never let me touch his skin for too long. But I was drawn to him, consumed by him. One night, under the watchful eye of a sickly red moon, he asked me to marry him. His hands were cold as he slid the ring onto my finger. Something inside me screamed no. But my lips betrayed me. I said yes, and with that, I sealed my fate. There were no guests, no family. Only an ancient, blind priest who never looked me in the eye. The ceremony was held in a rotting chapel where the air reeked of damp wood and something else, something sickly sweet like flowers left too long on a grave. The candles flickered violently, their flames stretching unnaturally high as the priest spoke our vows. Daniel's grip on my hands was crushing. The moment he said, "I do," the doors slammed shut. The air in the chapel became heavy, suffocating. I swore I heard something move in the shadows, something breathing. I turned to look at Daniel, and for a split second, his face wasn't his face at all. It was wrong, stretched, hollow. His mouth was open too wide, as if his skin was trying to remember how to shape itself. Then, as quickly as it came, the moment passed. The priest muttered something under his breath, voice trembling. It sounded like a warning. Our home was a mansion lost in time, a decaying thing at the edge of a forest no one entered. The house groaned as we stepped inside, as if it were breathing, waiting. The air inside was stale, thick with dust and the faintest hint of something rotting. The walls were lined with paintings, portraits of people whose faces had been smeared, warped, their eyes nothing but black pits. At night, I heard voices, not whispering, crying. Daniel never slept, and neither did one. I stopped eating, stopped feeling hunger, but my body never weakened. I started waking up in strange places, the attic, the cellar, the forest behind the house. My feet were always muddy, my hands covered in scratches I didn't remember getting. And the mirrors? They no longer showed my reflection. Only a shadow that wasn't mine. The nightmares bled into reality. I would wake up screaming, only to find Daniel sitting at the foot of the bed, watching me. Always watching. Then I found the newspaper. The paper was yellowed, brittle with age. Daniel Lockwood missing since 1876, presumed dead. I stared at the photograph. It was him. The article said Daniel had been a wealthy heir, engaged to a woman named Eleanor. Days before their wedding, he vanished. His body was never found. I turned to run only to find Daniel standing behind me. But it wasn't him. His skin was gray, stretched too tight over his skull. His lips were black, peeling. His teeth, too many, too sharp, grinned at me as something thick and black dripped from his mouth. "You weren't supposed to see that," he whispered. His voice wasn't his voice anymore. It was layered, rotten. I tried to scream, but he was already on me. Everything went black. I woke up in bed, but the room wasn't the same. The walls pulsed, the ceiling sagged as if something heavy was moving above it. The paintings, the figures in them were closer. And Daniel, he was beside me, but he wasn't breathing. His skin was cold, clammy, and when I reached out to touch him, his body caved under my fingers as if it were hollow. I scrambled back. The bed was wet. I looked down. The sheets were soaked in something dark, something warm. I threw myself off the bed, panting, and that's when I saw it. My hands, my nails were torn off. The tips of my fingers are raw, bloody, like I had been clawing at something. I turned to the door. It was gone. Daniel's voice slithered through the room, deep and distorted. "You belong to me." I spun around. The bed was empty. Then I felt him. I spun around. The bed was empty. Then I felt him. Behind me, his breath, rotten and cold, brushed against my ear. His fingers are longer now, sharper, trailed down my spine. "You made a vow," he whispered, and the walls split open. They weren't walls at all. They were flesh. Something inside them twitched, moving, moaning. Eyes blinked at me from the rotten folds of the house itself. I tried to run, but the floor split apart beneath me, revealing a pit of writhing, broken bodies. Their mouths stretched open in silent screams, their fingers reaching, grasping, and at the bottom of that pit, staring up at me, was me. My own body, decayed and lifeless, mouth open in a frozen scream. I choked on my own breath. My own body, decayed and lifeless, mouth open in a frozen scream. I choked on my own breath. No. Daniel stepped closer, his limbs jerking unnaturally, his jaw unhinged with a sickening crack, his blackened tongue lolling out. You never left. I shook my head violently. No, Daniel cupped my face with his rotting hands, his skin sloughing off in wet clumps. You died on our wedding night, my love. His mouth stretched into a grotesque grin, splitting his cheeks open. You just don't remember. I opened my mouth to scream, but only dirt spilled out. I woke up in bed. Daniel lay beside me, smiling, his fingers interlaced with mine. I tried to move, but my body wouldn't respond. My breath hitched. Then I realized I wasn't breathing. Slowly, I turned my head toward the mirror. What I saw wasn't me. It was her. The Eleanor from the newspaper. Her hollow eyes, her rotting skin, my skin. Daniel squeezed my hand. You're finally home, he whispered, and in that moment, I knew I had been dead all along, and now I was his. Forever.